Wonderful, thank you. So hello, and welcome to the Applicant webinar for the 2023 International Joint Initiative for Research in Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation. My name is Julia Henderson, and I'm a Program Officer on the New Frontiers and Research Fund team. And joining me today are a number of my colleagues, including Manager Emma Fieldhouse and Director Kim Douglas. The webinar today will be presented in English, but please feel free to ask questions in the official language of your choice. Même si ce webinaire sera présenté en anglais, veuillez poser toute question dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Throughout the presentation, my colleagues will be answering your questions in the Q&A box. We ask that you please use this function rather than the chat or a raised hand, which we won't be checking. We will also have an opportunity to answer questions verbally in a Q&A session following the presentation. I wanted to note as well that the webinar is being recorded, and both the recording and the PowerPoint document will be made available after the presentation. The presentation contains live links, and you'll be able to access these from the document that we send out. So there are some links to some resources that you may use in preparing your applications. A French webinar was also presented earlier this week and will also be made available. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that since I am in Ottawa, I am on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We're all joining from different places today, so I want to encourage you to take a moment to reflect on and acknowledge the traditional Indigenous territory where you are. And now I'm going to turn off my webcam so we can put the focus on the slides. So this slide here includes an overview of today's presentation. We will cover a description of the funding opportunity, followed by a competition timeline. We will go over eligibility and roles. We will discuss the merit review selection criteria, followed by a description of the NOI stage and the full application stage. We will provide some information for RGOs or research administrators, followed by some details on the review process. And finally, we will have a period where we will highlight some resources and a question and answer period as well. We will begin with a description of the funding opportunity. To give some context on this call, the 6th Assessment Report of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change highlights that unprecedented changes in Earth's climate are being observed in every region, impacting all ecosystems and societies, and will continue to intensify with further warning. Climate-related changes to ecosystems have many impacts. In addition to causing significant loss of biodiversity, these changes affect food and water security and increase the incidence of disease and natural disasters, which in turn increase human conflict, displacement, and health impacts, including loss of life. There's also an economic dimension as countries struggle with the increased costs of healthcare, damage to infrastructure, and the costs of adaptation measures. In response to this threat to the future well-being and prosperity of our planet and all who inhabit it, this call represents a collaboration among research funders from Brazil, Canada, Germany, Norway, South Africa, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and the United States to leverage international expertise to tackle the global challenges caused by climate change. The initiative's goal is to further the design and implementation of co-produced adaptation and mitigation strategies for vulnerable groups. Those groups currently most impacted by the effects of climate change owing to both physical vulnerability and socioeconomic vulnerability. So the 6th Assessment IPCC reports contain more than 130 risks that could become severe, taking into consideration climate hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. The reports grouped these key risks into 8 representative key risks, which you will see enumerated on the screen. The multiple connections among the representative key risks highlight the potential for the amplification of the impacts of climate change. The interconnectedness also emphasizes the importance of considering the broader context to prevent maladaptation. To encourage research in comprehensive strategies, projects must directly address at least 2 of the representative key risks. Now, to speak to the joint initiative design of this call, the call is supported by research funding organizations from different countries, referred to as the consortium partners, and you will see these listed on your screen. A minimum of 3 countries must be represented among the co-PIs, and the team must be eligible to receive funds from at least 2 consortium partners. At least 1 co-PI must be eligible to apply to the NFRF program. NOIs and full applications will be submitted to NFRF, and NFRF will facilitate the review process. In keeping with the joint initiative design, this call takes a coordinated funding approach, where each consortium partner will fund researchers within a project team who are eligible to receive funding from them. Funding will be awarded according to the rules, regulations, terms, and conditions of the consortium partners. Therefore, eligible expenses may vary across a project team, so we highly recommend that applicants review the documentation from the relevant consortium partners to ensure that their proposed project meets all of the eligibility requirements from those who they are requesting funding from. It's also possible that team members who are not eligible to receive funds from other consortium partners may be eligible for support from NFRF. So we please ask that you consult the links in the competition overview regarding the consortium partners' eligibility requirements and the annexes as well that are presented on our website. As I mentioned before, there are live links in this document that you will be able to use to refer back to our website following the presentation. The value of these awards will depend on the consortium partners that will be supporting the project. So again, please refer to the information provided in the annexes for information on the level of financial support available. In terms of the duration, projects should be designed to be completed within 3 years. 1 year no-cost extensions may be available in some circumstances, depending on the funding organization, on request, and requiring appropriate justification. And here is one of those live links to the annexes and a screenshot of what they look like on our website. So we ask that you please consult these annexes for more information. Now we will discuss the competition timeline. This is a 2-stage competition. The first stage is the Notice of Intent to Apply stage, and this is a mandatory step to be able to submit a full application, which is the second stage of the competition. Important dates include those listed on the screen, the first of which is the Notice of Intent deadline on May 2nd. Please note that deadlines are always at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and they are deadlines for submission to NFRF. Your institution's research administrator may have their own internal deadlines, so please check with them. Now we will discuss eligibility and roles. For this competition, project teams will be composed of co-PIs who will be responsible for directing the project and coordinating proposed research activities, in addition to participating in the execution of the research project. Co-applicants and collaborators will contribute to the execution of the research project. Again, a reminder that a minimum of 3 countries must be represented among the co-PIs, and the team must be eligible to receive funds from at least 2 consortium partners, and at least 1 co-PI must be eligible to apply to the NFRF program. Proposals are to be submitted by interdisciplinary and transsectoral teams with appropriate stakeholders. It is also strongly recommended that project teams include at least 1 expert in social sciences or humanities among the co-PIs. Project teams are also encouraged to support the next generation of researchers. So all projects are required to partner with participating community or communities in the co-creation, implementation, and ownership of the research and outcomes, and to develop approaches related to policy implementation and knowledge mobilization. In this way, the call aims to strengthen the connections among research, governance, and communities to ensure that funded projects are both transformative and impactful. This approach ensures that projects develop strategies related to policy, communication, and community partnerships to encourage acceptance, support, and the behavioral changes required for implementation. The integration of team members from the vulnerable groups is required. We also want to mention that a forum will be organized at the midterm and at the end of the grant period to highlight the outcomes of funded projects and enable knowledge mobilization and cross-project learning. Applicants are encouraged, therefore, to include expenses related to attending the fora in their project budgets. It is expected that policymakers from governments and non-governmental organizations will attend, and the fora may also be a springboard for new research collaborations. But project teams are also encouraged to organize more frequent meetings with other project teams. The final aspect of project team eligibility that we wish to highlight is that individuals may participate as a co-PI on only one application to this competition. An individual who is listed as a co-PI on multiple applications will have their status changed to a co-applicant on all but one application, determined by the order in which they were received. Before we move on to the merit review selection criteria, I want to pause and ask Emma if there are any questions that we should address verbally at this time.
I think carry on for now, and we'll go back to what's in the box after.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. So the first criterion that applications will be evaluated for is fit to program. In order to be considered fit to program, the proposed research must address at least 2 of the 8 representative key risks that were presented earlier in the presentation, and further design and implementation of co-produced adaptation and mitigation strategies for vulnerable groups. Applications must clearly outline the risks that the proposed work addresses, and the proposal must also define and justify how the group implicated in the work meets the definition of a vulnerable group. The second criterion is interdisciplinarity and transsectoral research. The proposed research must present an interdisciplinary and transsectoral approach. Projects may involve any disciplines, thematic areas, approaches, or subject areas, and may address fundamental or applied challenges. But the interdisciplinary and transsectoral approach is considered essential to ensure that the project outcomes have a real impact and the potential to drive societal change. So when we refer to interdisciplinary approach, we mean integrating information, data, techniques, tools, perspectives, concepts, or theories from 2 or more disciplines or bodies of specialized knowledge. This will help bring a new perspective to the challenge. By a transsectoral approach, we mean involving working across the academic, research, economic, societal sectors, and/or community sectors in the design and execution of the project. This will help to ensure that projects yield useful and timely results. Proposals must explain how the disciplinary and sectoral perspectives, methodologies, and techniques will be integrated, maintained, and implemented to create interdisciplinary and transsectoral approaches. In addition, they must demonstrate that the team has the required expertise to execute the approach. The next criterion is equity, diversity, and inclusion in research practice. Applicants must clearly demonstrate their commitment to EDI in research teams. Teams should also include diversity as it applies to career stages, sectors, institutions, regions, and countries. They must explain what actions they will take, outcomes expected, and the assessment plan for each of the following key areas: team composition and recruitment, training and development, and inclusion. The actions that are taken are expected to remove barriers and provide opportunities for the meaningful integration of individuals from all groups. An application must not include any personal information about members of the research team in the EDI section. The focus is on the team's commitment to EDI and not its EDI profile. We'll now discuss the high-risk criterion. Within the context of this competition, high risk refers to the novelty of the proposed approach to the challenge and the quality of the research proposed. Important to note that proposals that address a rarely tackled challenge or an uncommon combination of risks may be considered higher risk. Regarding high risk, proposals will have to explain how the project is novel as it relates to the latest methods, concepts, information, and techniques, as well as other major projects currently underway. How the approach builds on and benefits from expertise, perspectives, and resources of a wide range of regions, disciplines, and/or sectors, including the communities, and why the approach is expected to lead to change. The high reward criterion is next, and in order for a proposal to be deemed high reward, funded proposals must have the potential to create a significant and real change or impact. Applications, therefore, must explain the anticipated change or impact that is likely to result and its significance. Proposals must also outline the major short, medium, and long-term changes that are expected, the likelihood of their being achieved, and who or what will be affected by the changes. High reward can be defined by elements such as, but not limited to, having an economic, scientific, artistic, cultural, social, technological, or health impact, impacting and or affecting large communities or unique communities or subpopulations with the potential to provide lessons for other contexts, significantly advancing current knowledge, methods, and or technologies and positioning them for uptake, and or implementing, testing, and refining solutions for maximum impact. Next, feasibility considers the plan and the ability to execute the activities. It includes many elements that are listed on the screen, including work plan and timeline, project's partnership and reciprocity with communities and other stakeholders, and the suitability of the research environment, among those others that are listed on our screen. One sub-element of the feasibility criterion that we would like to spend some time discussing is equity, diversity, and inclusion considerations in research design. EDI in research design considers the potential impact that identity factors may have on the individual's experience. The goal in considering EDI in research design is to promote rigorous research that is sensitive to sex and gender, as well as many other identity factors. EDI considerations must be integrated in the project design, or a rationale must be provided in cases where a research team believes no aspect of their research may benefit from analysis to consider sex, gender, or other identity factors. The final selection consideration we would like to touch on is diversity. Diversity may be considered as a second-order consideration, which will only apply between equally rated applications to prioritize an application that addresses risks not tackled by other proposals ranked as high or higher in the call, an uncommon combination of risks, and or challenges faced by vulnerable groups in unique geographic regions not tackled by other proposals ranked as high or higher in the call. For more information, please consult the evaluation matrices on our website, and there's a live link here that will direct you to that section of our website. We will now discuss the Notice of Intent stage. Notices of Intent to Apply, or NOIs, will be used for administrative purposes to assess indicative eligibility of the project team, to identify external reviewers, and to compose the multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral review panel. This is a mandatory step in the application process. You must submit an NOI to be eligible to create and submit a full application. The deadline for NOI submission to NFRF is May 2nd, but we again remind you to check with the research administrator at your institution for their internal deadlines. Because the research administrator at the institution of the co-PI eligible to receive funding from NFRF is the one who is responsible for submitting the NOI to the agency by 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the deadline date. Late NOIs will not be accepted, and an NOI cannot be changed after the RGO has submitted it. So, be sure to let your RGO know as soon as possible that you intend to apply, particularly if you are from a smaller institution. This will give the RGO time to create an account if they don't already have one, so that they can submit your NOI on time. All team members should inform their own research administrators if they have one of their involvement in the NOI. To briefly touch on the collection of personal information, the self-identification information is collected as a part of your user profile when you register in the Convergence portal. However, it is not part of your application, and it is not accessible to or shared with external reviewers and or multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral review panel members. Access to the information is also restricted to most agency staff, and the information is only used in aggregate following competitions. There's a link on this slide as well to the data collection policy if you would like to read further. This slide provides a list of the NOI requirements on the Convergence portal. All co-PIs will have full access to all sections of the NOI on the portal. Co-applicants will be able to see all sections of the NOI, but will not have edit access. And only the NFRF eligible co-PI can finalize and submit the NOI to their research administrator. So the requirements include completed profiles for research team members. Please note that collaborators do not need to complete a profile. Also, additional team members may be added at the full application stage. You will need to provide an application title, indicate the language of the application. You'll need to indicate if the project involves Indigenous research. You'll need to provide keywords, fields of research, and identify the key risks that your proposal addresses. You will need to select the consortium partners that you are requesting funding from. You'll need to provide a summary of the proposal, and we'll provide some more information on the summary in the next slide. A list of collaborators, identify socioeconomic objectives, and provide some suggested reviewers. A note on the suggested reviewers, these are potential reviewers to be contacted who would review the proposal at the full application stage. Teams are encouraged to suggest a diverse cross-section of potential reviewers, so international, established and early career researchers, members of underrepresented groups from academic and non-academic institutions, with appropriate expertise to review and comment on the proposal. These individuals must not be in a conflict of interest with any member of the team, as defined by the conflict of interest and confidentiality policy of the federal research funding organizations. The team can also suggest individuals who should not be considered to review the proposal. And finally, for the NOI, there will be some supporting documents. There is a budget table, and if applicable, supplementary information for consortium partners. Okay, as mentioned, we'll discuss a bit more in detail regarding the summary of the proposal. The summary of the proposal is a maximum of 2,500 characters, and it should include the objectives of the proposed research project and a summary of the research approach. It should also indicate which of the representative key risks the proposal addresses and how the anticipated changes and impacts will contribute to participatory, contextually, and culturally appropriate mitigation and adaptation responses to climate change. Once submitted by your research administrator, this summary cannot be modified. And if your application is successful, the summary may be used for promotional purposes outside the research community. So when it is time to submit the NOI, a reminder that only the NFRF eligible co-PI is able to submit the NOI, but we do ask that everyone on the team review the NOI to ensure that it is complete. From the Finalize Application section in the Convergence portal, you will follow the prompts to submit the NOI. After you accept the terms and conditions, the status will change to Received by Administrator. Then, once the research administrator has approved and submitted the application, the status will then change to Received by Agency, and no changes can be made at that point. Okay, so the second stage of the competition, as mentioned previously, is the full application stage. The deadline for the full application is September 12th, and the submission process will be the same as it was for the NOIs. More information is to come on the full application requirements, so we ask that you please stay tuned to our website for updates on what will be required at that stage of the competition. We will now have some information for research grants offices or research administrators. This section will be most relevant for institutions of the NFRF eligible co-PIs, as they are the ones who will be responsible for submitting the NOIs and full applications. So RGOs in the Convergence portal will be able to view NOIs and full applications from co-PIs at their institution. They'll be able to return submitted NOIs and full applications to the co-PI and forward submitted NOIs and full applications to the agency. Before forwarding an application to the agency, the RGO will be asked to confirm that the participants and the proposed research project meet the eligibility requirements. By forwarding the application, the RGO will be also certifying on behalf of their institution that the co-PI is or will be affiliated with their institution organization, has the necessary time and resources to carry out the activity, and that they will email the NFRF inbox of any changes during the tenure of the grant. This slide indicates some information on the research administrator role in the Convergence portal. RGOs in the portal can use the research administrator button, which is circled, to access their institution's application. If you are an RGO and you don't currently see this button, please contact the email on this screen. Our web support team will send you a form to complete so that you can become a research administrator in Convergence. Please don't wait until the last minute to do this. Become a research administrator as soon as possible in the Convergence portal if you haven't already. Okay, now we will detail the review process. This slide demonstrates the movement of applications during the review process. So we'd like to provide an overview of each of these steps. Notices of intent, as previously mentioned, will be used for administrative purposes. Then, full applications will be reviewed by external reviewers and members of the multidisciplinary multisectoral review panel who will consider the external reviewer's input. So, to speak to the external reviewer role, we will make efforts to recruit a minimum of 2 external reviewers to evaluate each full application. These reviewers will be asked to comment on the interdisciplinarity, high risk, high reward, and feasibility criteria. The external reviewers will have access to the summary from the NOI and to the EDI considerations in research design section, the research proposal, and budget justification from the full application. Then the multidisciplinary multisectoral review panel. Each application will be assigned to 3 members of this review panel. These members will have access to the entire application in addition to the external reviewer reports. The members will assess proposals against the following selection criteria using the evaluation matrices as a guide. They will assess fit to program on a pass-fail, EDI in the research environment or research practice as a pass-fail, interdisciplinary and transsectoral approach also on a pass-fail. Then high risk will be worth 20%, high reward 40%, and feasibility 40%. Members' ratings for the high risk, high reward, and feasibility criteria will determine an overall score for each application. The review panel will meet virtually to discuss the applications. In the event of a high volume of applications, members' ratings may be used to identify those that will be discussed at the meeting. An application with an overall rating of fail for the fit to program, EDI, or interdisciplinarity criteria are not considered fundable. The Multidisciplinary Multisectoral Review Committee will agree to a final list ranking all applications according to their overall merit. This ranked list will then be used in discussions with the consortium partners to determine which applications will be funded. Applications will be funded in their ranked order from highest score to lowest. An application in the list will only be skipped in cases where one consortium partner has no budget remaining to award to it. For some more information on what makes an exceptional project, we encourage applicants to refer back to the evaluation matrices on the website. For each criterion, the reviewer is asked to consider relevant elements, which may include a few, several, or all of the elements outlined in the evaluation matrices, as well as others not listed. The matrices are intended to be used as a guide. Unless otherwise noted, a proposal does not have to be rated exceptional against all elements to receive an exceptional rating for the criterion overall. It is left to the discretion of the reviewer to balance assessments of individual elements and to provide an overall rating per criterion. For the high risk, high reward, and feasibility evaluation criteria, the matrices indicate 4 ratings: exceptional, very good, fair, and poor. However, members can use a 7-point scale in their assessments, selecting ratings that fall between the 4 described. The 7-point rating scale for the high risk, high reward, and feasibility evaluation criteria are shown on the slide. Okay, this brings us to our resources and questions section. So to highlight a few resources that will be useful in the preparation of your applications, This slide has a list of helpful contact information to if you have questions about the application, or if you require some technical support, there's also contacts for that. Here is a helpful list of links to our website that break down the various sections of our website and the content. This is a link to our EDI best practices guide, which will provide you with more information as you're preparing those sections of the application. And for proposals involving Indigenous research, SSHRC's Indigenous Research Statement of Principles and Guidelines for the Merit Review of Indigenous Research may be used as a reference. The guidelines are provided to merit reviewers to help build understanding of Indigenous research and research-related activities, and to help the committee members interpret the specific evaluation criteria in the context of Indigenous research. The guidelines may also be useful to external assessors, post-secondary institutions, and partner organizations that support Indigenous research. Here we have a link to a video capsule of a walkthrough of preparing a notice of intent. This walkthrough was for the New Frontiers in Research Fund Exploration Competition. There are similarities between the sections in this walkthrough and the ones on the Convergence portal for this competition, but they are not the same funding opportunity. We would also like to mention that more programs are now using the Convergence portal for their funding opportunities, so be sure to select the correct competition, the right program, and the right stream. Okay. So now I will stop sharing the slides and turn my camera back on so we can have a period of questions and answers. Okay, I will look through and see if there are any questions that require a verbal response. My colleagues who were answering questions, is there anything recurring that we should address?
Sure. I'll go through some of the questions, and then
Okay.
I think Kim's going to respond to some of them. So
Okay.
we've had quite a lot of questions about the budget available and the coordination of the budget between the partners. So Kim, do you want to start by speaking to that?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. So the funding model, we call this it is not a common pot model. It is a coordinated funding approach. And so this is a similar approach that is used with large joint initiatives such as Belmont Forum, for example, or I'm sure there are others. That's the first one that pops into my mind. So with this, it's not that all the money goes into one pot and then it's distributed in the order that the applications are ranked. For this approach, what happens is that all of the applications are ranked and we start at the top. NFRF has the highest available competition budget, which is the reason that there is a requirement for an NFRF eligible researcher to be one of the co-PIs, because the CRCC is putting in $60 million to this call over 3 years. So what will happen is, as they're in the ranked list, NFRF will be sort of the default, yes, we'll fund it, yes, we'll fund it, yes, we'll fund it. The other partners will then look at them. So let's say the first application, other than NFRF, I won't talk about NFRF, but the first 5 applications are looking for funding from NSF, and the second one is from DFGA, the third one's DFGA, fourth one's NSF. I'll just use those ones. So then NSF will say, yep, we'll fund that top one. DFGA, yep, we'll fund the second one. DFGA, the third one. It will get to a point where there will be an application that's ranked. It's the next in the list that has NSF as the other funder, and NSF doesn't have any more money. So in that case, we will have to skip that application and go to the next one where all of the consortium partners involved for that application have funds left to give to it. And the funds will go directly from it. So for example, on an application that has an NFRF eligible researcher and also one from the US who's eligible to receive funds from NSF. The funds from NSF will not go to the Canadian researcher or the NFRF eligible researcher in Canada. The NSF funds will flow through the person that is eligible to receive funding from them. So they will be in charge of that part of the budget. The NFRF eligible researcher will only be in charge of the NFRF budget for this whole project.
And Kim, maybe there too, you could speak a little bit to how NFRF funds can flow to countries outside of the consortium partners.
Yes, so in understanding in this call, and it is, I believe NFRF is the only current consortium partner that allows this or that can do this easily.
I think
So
potentially UKRI as well. But
okay. Thank you, Emma, for specifying that as well. That's true, because some of their funds are coming from through a mechanism that allows that. So in recognition that these the projects for this call must be co-developed with vulnerable communities. So we are expecting that. And you know, a good number of the most vulnerable communities in the world are not in the countries where the consortium partners are. So there is a recognition that there are going to be co-PIs and co-applicants who are in countries that are not, I'll say, represented by the consortium partners. NFRF funding, and this has it's true for all NFRF grants to date and in all of our different streams, but NFRF funding can be used to support research activities outside of Canada. It has to be from, you know, somebody that is named as a co-applicant or a co-PI, but NFRF funds can flow to, for example, if you were working, if the research team is working at, you know, looking at adaptation to rising seawater in low-lying coastal communities. So a co-PI might be, you know, a representative of that low-lying coastal community, not represented by a consortium partner. So NFRF funds can support the activities of that co-PI and the activities that happen on the ground in that area, in that country. I've seen some kind of questions pop through. So Emma, I'm just going to jump on one right here. It is one single application. So nobody else is running a competition. It is one competition that we are running. NFRF is taking the lead on this. We have told all the consortium partners that we will do all the work. What we wanted them to do was to support the call and to really make this an international initiative. So it is one application. The nominated co-principal investigator, and we're calling it that, so it still has an NPI acronym, which you may be used to in the NFRF context, has to be eligible to apply to NFRF. And so that individual can open the application, they start the application in Convergence Portal, and then all of the co-PIs, no matter where they are in the world, will have access to that. They will be able to write in the application, they will be able to do uploads, and then it is the Canadian, so the NFRF eligible co-PI who at the end submits it. And that's almost as much a result of the technical limitations we have with Convergence Portal in terms of eligibility as it is for anything else. So yes, but it is a single application. There is no, I think the term is double jeopardy or multiple jeopardy. We are managing the evaluation process with a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary review panel, which will be very international as well. The results of that assessment will get to a ranked list that all of the consortium partners have already agreed to this process. So there won't be any afterwards, well, I actually prefer the one that's number 62 because of reasons X, Y, and Z. They've already agreed to this. So it's one application and one result, one evaluation, one result. Now, there may be some partners that also request additional documentation to be sent to them directly, but that it's more administrative to open an account. That's not the right word. Open a file there, that's probably the better word, in their own systems in order to allow the administration of funds at, if the project is awarded, but it is not being evaluated any other way other than through the process that we are managing.
Thank you very much, Kim. I'm just going through the questions and seeing if there's anything that we can address verbally that would be beneficial.
I'm happy to
for all.
answer as many. I can't keep track of all of them in there.
Of
So,
course,
Evan,
yes.
if you've seen some that have gone by that seem to repeat, or Danielle or Marina, please, feel free to say them. I've noticed a couple go by, but I'm more than happy to answer. Well, I'll answer this. So there was a few questions that went by. I think they may have been addressed as well. While I let Julia and Emma look for other, and Danielle and Marina look for other burning questions. It was a question about the requirement for 3 co-PIs. So it's a minimum of 3 co-PIs. We're not saying anything about average team size, maximum team size. It has to make sense for the project that's being proposed. And in terms of the individual's title, whether they are invited or included as a co-PI, a co-principal investigator, or as a co-applicant, it's whatever makes sense for the project that's being proposed. We set a minimum of 3 co-PIs for the reason that a project must be fundable. They must be seeking funding from at least 2 consortium partners. This was a way to make sure it was really an international endeavor, that it's a joint initiative, it crosses borders, that we're getting, that the projects are making use of expertise that is globally diverse. So it's not, just Canadian centric, for example. So at least 2 of the 3 have to be eligible to apply to a consortium partner. We've also said one of them has to be NFREF eligible. So essentially, if you go to the minimum, a research team that meets the minimum requirements will have 1 NFREF eligible co-PI, 1 co-PI that is eligible to apply for funding from one of the other consortium partners. And the third one could be eligible to apply to a consortium partner, whether the same as the second one or a different one, because it's not a limitation of 2. If a project comes and they can apply to 5 of the consortium partners, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, it depends on how it's set up, of course, but it could be seen as an advantage that it really is an international joint effort. One of the co-PIs, though, because we have talked about, depending on the number, because the call is really focused on vulnerable communities and on the importance of co-development. So it's expected that one of the co-PIs, either within the 3 or if you have more, is going to be a representative or somebody that is working very closely with or can speak to that vulnerable community. As I just mentioned, there are a good number of vulnerable communities that are not within the countries where the consortium partners are, and so therefore that partner could be supported by the NFREF funds in the manner that I've already described. And Emma, please jump in if I've said anything in a way that is not the clearest and you think clarification would help.
Maybe we could speak a little bit to vulnerable groups or a little bit more, I guess, about the expectations both for vulnerable groups and for things like interdisciplinarity. And so I think probably people are looking for clarification on the evaluation matrices, that those are going to be, maybe just to say that we would recommend that you look at what's in the evaluation matrices, because that is how the reviewers, both the expert reviewers, external reviewers, and the committee are going to be judging whether the proposal meets the requirements for inclusion of vulnerable groups and meets the interdisciplinarity and transsectoral research components. But there's been a few questions about the level of involvement of vulnerable groups and the geographic focus of vulnerable groups. So I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to that.
Okay, so vulnerable groups, and this is all outlined in the literature, and as Emma noted, really strongly suggest you look at the evaluation matrices, because that's how they're going to be evaluated. But the definition is vulnerable groups, and this is important. So they're those groups who are currently most impacted by the effects of climate change. So we all acknowledge that every person, there is nobody on this planet who is going to emerge unscathed from climate change. But for vulnerable groups, we're talking about those currently experiencing the greatest risk at this present time. And it's for there's 2 facets to that, because there's a physical vulnerability. So whether it is, you know, because the impact of climate change is more acutely felt where they live. So I mentioned before, low-lying coastal communities, small island nations, for example, communities in the Arctic. These are areas where the impacts of climate change are being felt more acutely than in other areas. It's also due to infrastructure. So in some areas, or in some cases, the group is vulnerable because they don't have the required infrastructure in order to address these issues. It also, in addition to the physical vulnerability, there must be a socioeconomic vulnerability as well. So this means that there is a lack of resources to be able to respond and adapt. So whether it's financial resources, knowledge, you know, so knowing how to address it, technology resources, and sometimes it's even for social reasons. So for example, you know, to conflict and security, there may be reasons there. Now, in terms of what constitutes or you know, can I provide a list of vulnerable groups? No, I can't do that. That will be assessed through the evaluation process. I saw LMICs, which it stands for low and middle income countries, go by in one of the questions earlier. And so yes, there are a number of vulnerable groups in low and middle income countries. They're not, I would say that not every vulnerable group is in a lower middle income country. You know, they can find pockets of pockets, it's not the right word, but there are vulnerable groups even in countries that are not lower middle income. But it really is up to the applicants to describe and explain how the group that they've proposed to work with fits this definition of a vulnerable group. I think you asked me to address the second part of, the interdisciplinarity and transsectoral approach. So in terms of interdisciplinarity, is there a degree required? Again, we're going to leave that to the evaluation or to the evaluation process, so our reviewers. The definition that's provided in terms of the minimum is that the project has to make use or integrate approaches from at least 2 different disciplines as a baseline. We strongly suggest that experts in social sciences or humanities be involved because of the role that they can play in community buy-in and acceptance and changing social norms in order to have the desired outcomes. It's not always a new technology that will solve a problem. It's technology plus making sure people who use it or people make those changes. So that's suggested, it's not required. For transsectoral as well, it's the same idea. So you need to work, the research teams need to involve the groups, the individuals and the groups that are required in order to make change happen. So this isn't, this funding opportunity is not hoping to have more papers that talk about how climate change is impacting people or that it is. It really is solution focused. And in order to have implementation of those solutions, in order to be able to, you know, design something that might work and even be able to assess whether this intervention is working, this adaptation or mitigation, it doesn't have to be adaptation and, it's or. It's more than just an academic pursuit. And so transsectoral, does it have to, I think the question came by, does it have to include government and private industry and community groups and social groups? No, it's not a checklist that you have to meet all of them. The team has to have the right mix of people from the right backgrounds and the right organizations with the right expertise to be able to affect a positive change in terms of either adaptation or mitigation to an immediate or an acute climate change related threat on a vulnerable group.
Thank you, Kim. There's been a number of questions, and again, you touched on this briefly, but perhaps we can address it specifically as well, as it seems to be a common question regarding NFRF / a Canadian participant's requirement to be involved in the proposal. So there's, yes, the teams do need to have one eligible co-PI, one NFRF eligible co-PI, and NFRF does fund Canadian researchers. There's more information on who is eligible for NFRF funding in the NFRF annex on our website. And that will be the individual who submits the NOI through the Convergence portal, so I can answer that. But there's also some questions regarding how non-Canadian teams can get in touch then with Canadian actors. I don't know if we have any resources for that.
Well, we don't have any specific, resources to aid networking in this respect. I mean, I suppose there. I'm sorry, I have something at the top for a second, and just give me a second.
I will continue on.
Yeah,
essentially,
maybe I'll just speak.
Oh, yes,
of course. Go ahead, Julia.
No, I was just going to say that we do, teams are required to find their own partners and to connect and provide proposals together. NFRF doesn't really facilitate that typically. So.
Oh, Kim's back. Do you want to add anything there?
Sorry, I missed that last part. I apologize.
No worries. I was just saying that teams are typically required to do their own networking and to, find their own partners, and NFRF doesn't really facilitate this process.
We unfortunately, we don't have the resources to do that. I am sure there are resources, or there may be resources available through various universities in Canada, but I don't have nothing specific, but we can try and find resources in the meantime that we could provide as well. I just saw, wait a second.
Yeah, we've had
sorry,
questions about how either the NFRF eligible applicant or the RGO determines eligibility for team members outside of Canada. And I think the general recommendation is, if you're expecting NFRF funds to flow through the eligible Canadian institution to an international co-applicant team member organization, then the NFRF doesn't necessarily have any restrictions, but we would suggest discussing with your research grants office ahead of time, because it will be up to the institution's policies on how they can transfer funds abroad because the NFRF money will have to flow through the eligible Canadian institution.
So I saw a question about the inclusion of, so the interdisciplinary. It says, so the inclusion of 2 disciplines, it's asking for us to specify or clarification if that means natural sciences and social sciences, or for example, if human geography and political sciences can be considered 2 disciplines. We make use of the Canada Research and Development classification codes, CRDC codes. And so no, it's not required to cross, if you're thinking of the Canadian context or even others, so it's not required to cross social sciences, natural sciences and engineering and health, but to really incorporate and integrate 2 different disciplines. So again, with the caveat that the consortium partners in developing this strongly suggested considering adding, including a member who can ensure that essentially that the knowledge translation or the knowledge implementation part happens. But there's no requirement to, for example, to include NSE if a team doesn't, or natural sciences, sorry for the acronyms. There's no requirement to include across those big disciplinary areas. There's a question there. Oh, I did see questions come by earlier about the total amount of funding available from each of the funding partners. So I've already mentioned that for NFRF, it's $20 million a year. Somebody has said that's about 40 teams that will be eventually funded. That's right. We expect a minimum of 40 teams to be fundable or funded from NFRF funds. The partners haven't all committed it's not included on the website yet because some of them, given their fiscal years and the process they have to go through, they haven't yet landed on a firm number. I will say that for the majority of them, it's around $5 million. Canadian is about the equivalent. That was sort of the minimum, and several of them have indicated that there's likely to be more. To give you an idea. Okay, so a question just came by. So what role do consortium partners play in the evaluation? So the consortium partners, we will be asking them for suggestions for members for us and external reviewers that we will rely on in composing the multidisciplinary multi-sectoral review panel. It'll be very international, and also the external reviewers that we will be using. The consortium partners will review the budget information, obviously, but not as the evaluation. So once we have the final list, or maybe, while we're doing the evaluation, they won't play a role in the evaluation, but they will look at the budget to make sure, well, sorry, let me back up. At the NOI stage, they're going to look to make sure that the person who said, I'm one of the co-PIs on this application, and myself and my two partners, we're going to apply to NFRF. That individual is NFRF eligible. I'm UKRI eligible, for example, so we'll say that we'll also ask for funds from UKRI. At the NOI stage, they're going to have a look at the information we've collected there for a quick assessment to make sure that I actually am UKRI eligible, or eligible to receive funds from them. If I'm not, so if I'm on this team and I'm not, it's our intention to actually go back and say, you know what, sorry, but you're not eligible. So the team would come back to me, Emma would come back to me and say, you're not eligible. And then we'd go, uh-oh. But what that would do is give us the chance to add somebody who actually is eligible, or maybe it turns out I made a mistake and I'm not UKRI eligible, I'm NSF eligible, and to fix those problems. We don't expect a lot of them, but that's the first step that they will do. So it's administrative, it's not an evaluation. And again, at the end of the process, it will again be an administrative review of the budget to make sure it meets their requirements in terms of what the project is asking for from UKRI, similar to what NFRF does. I mean, we look at that budget, and that it's aligned with their rules and their terms and conditions, but it's not in terms of the merit evaluation of the application. Grant holders for any other NFRF project, any stream. So whether you have applied for, or you hold, or you plan to apply for an NFRF, and for those who are not part of the Canadian context who are on this call, it's a little aside, I apologize, but if you have an exploration grant, transformation grant, a Horizon Global Platform grant, a special calls grant, that your status as a grantee or an applicant in any of those other ones has no bearing on your eligibility to apply. So this is considered, it's a separate call. I did see a question go by asking if this was going to be repeated competition. At the moment, we don't think so, but we don't know. So the development of these international joint initiatives is really under the direction of the Canada Research Coordinating Committee, so the CRCC, and they had decided in summer 2021 that they thought climate change was a good area to pursue, and we've been developing this ever since. So there will be more international joint initiative calls coming in the future. I'm not I don't know yet. I have not received direction yet of which subjects that they may pursue. They may decide to, to do something similar to this one again, or they may decide to tackle another topic altogether. So I can't, at the moment, we're focused on this one. I'm not focused on others, but it is not currently planned as a recurring competition.
I'm just looking to see if there are any questions. There are questions about whether this Q&A portion will be made available along with the slides, and this Q&A portion is also being recorded as part of the overall recording that you will receive.
It is also possible to save the Q&A
Yes.
Yourself before you exit the webinar today.
Yes, if you click on, I believe it's File and Save, you should be able to save the questions and answers.
Kim, there's been a few questions about what can be changed between the NOI and full application stage, or how much the NOI limits the full application. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Sorry, sorry, I missed.
In terms
I was
of
reading the questions, and so I missed what you said.
That's all right. There have been a few questions about what can be changed between the NOI and full application, or how much the NOI will limit the full application in terms of direction or team or anything like
that. Sure. So generally speaking, and Emma, I know you were involved in those conversations, so I may not have the information right at hand. We usually limit the updating of the fields of research. The summary, so we lock in the summary, the fields of research, the title, and the keywords, I believe. The team members at the NOI stage as well, so there's a minimum requirement of 3 co-PIs at the NOI stage. We expect them to be part of the full application, but there can be changes. And I believe sorry, I just will have to actually check on that again. I'm not sure about the suggested reviewers and the reviewer exclusions. I believe those ones we keep open. The reason that those are locked in, as we say, is because we make use of that information to start the composition of our team, or the multidisciplinary multi-sectoral review panel. So we make use of the information to make sure that the review panel and the external reviewers have the required expertise and the breadth of expertise required for the applications that that we see coming in. So but we are always, there are exceptions. So if something comes up and there's a critical need to adapt things, you can always reach out to the NFRF inbox, but generally speaking, we lock those in.
Someone asked if any part of the review process is blinded, like with the NFRF's exploration stream.
No, so we don't have a double anonymous review process built into this, as per our normal approach across the tri-agencies. The applicants will not know the identity of the external reviewers. That's what we consider, what we used to consider blinded, or now we refer to it as an anonymous review. It's double anonymous for those who are not aware. With our exploration stream, our external reviews don't actually know the identity of the research team, and so we call that a double anonymous, but we won't be doing that this time. Because of the importance of the research team ensuring that there's representation and involvement of representatives of the vulnerable group in order to make sure the projects really are a co-development, a co-leadership model, it's important that the external reviewers be able to see that as well, and therefore a double anonymous review process didn't make sense in this context. There's a question about the budget. So at the NOI stage, the budget is simply the amount being requested by consortium partner by year. There is no more detail than that. It may be divided between direct costs and indirect costs. Given that I'm not, I don't believe so. I think it's just total. At the full application stage, it will be a much more detailed budget. Can the amount be changed? Yes, I believe we decided to have that open as well. Again, the budget is to give us a notional idea. So what we don't want is everybody putting the maximum amount. But worse, we also don't want a minimum amount for everything, and then they end up requesting the maximum. So something within reason. For the NOI, for example, for NFRF, it's a maximum of 500,000 per year for 3 years. So you could put 500,000, you could put 400,000. We don't expect it to be, $478,962. That level of detail is not required. But again, it's notional to give us an idea of how many projects we may be able to fund at the end, given the amounts requested from NFRF and the amounts requested from the other consortium partners. The RFP been released from US institutions. Request for proposals, I'm assuming that's what it is. Yes, as far as we know, so all of the consortium partners had, we were all aiming for the same date. So it was January 24th that we officially launched the competition, and we published ours. It's our understanding that most or many of the consortium partners, some of them are due to processes that they're having to go through in terms of signatures and the like, they may not have been able to post it yet, but I know they're getting to that point. They've all signed the memorandum of understanding, so it is moving ahead. It's official. There's just sometimes a delay on other sides in terms of posting it on their websites.
I see a couple of questions about the review process and who will be on the review panel and how that will work. So this information is all available on the review process, section of our website. But NFRF is going to be facilitating the review process, and it will be a multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral review panel committee. I saw a question if it's going to be experts in climate change or generalists on the panel. It will be a multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral review panel, and you will all have opportunities in your NOIs and your applications to provide suggested names for reviewers who we will contact as well. I see a question. For Indigenous focused projects, Canada has an evolving process for the appropriate review of Indigenous research, including Indigenous traditional knowledge-based research. This is not the case with some of the other partners. NFRF is going to be facilitating the review process, and our reviewers have to follow the agency's guidelines for the review of Indigenous projects involving Indigenous research. I see a few questions on how to save the Q&A. I believe I might have a different view than all of you because I am a presenter, but there should be a file button. And if you click on file and then on save, there should be a section to save questions and answers.
Kim, there have been a few questions about, again, back to vulnerable communities and their involvement in the project, whether they have to be co-PIs and how that can be facilitated. So maybe we could just speak a little bit again. I know we've talked about that a little bit, but maybe just a little bit more.
So the representatives from vulnerable groups, do they have to be a co-PI? Without dictating the, how a research team is composed or how a project is designed, I think it would be challenging to demonstrate co-leadership and co-development if they are not equal partners in the research team. Again, we are not the ones, we administer the process, we're not the ones to actually do the evaluation. So I would strongly recommend looking at the evaluation matrices and the literature and seeing how members will be advised to be making assessments in terms of co-development and co-leadership. A question went by, and I'm assuming this is from somebody outside of the Canadian context, which is fine. Which it's really good for you to ask questions because sometimes we do default to the Canadian research ecosystem paradigm, and we forget to be very specific. So to be eligible to apply for NFRF funding, the individual has to be an independent researcher, generally an academic, who works for an institution, who has full institutional eligibility in Canada. So generally speaking, that is universities, colleges, research institutes, and sort of research hospitals, I would say are the biggest. I may be missing a group, but I don't think so. So those would be the main organizations or institutions that an NFRF eligible researcher would be working at. There's a question about, and it just went away, co-PIs from many eligible countries. Absolutely, not a problem at all. I think, honestly, that would really demonstrate and I think the example said Canada, Brazil, South Africa, and the US. I think it would really demonstrate a world-leading approach because you'd be using expertise from various, very different geographic locations, which could probably bring a really interesting perspective and an interesting new approach to addressing, the issue of climate change or climate change induced challenges faced by vulnerable groups.
We're still getting questions about the total project budget. So maybe, again, just to clarify that for each project, it will depend on which consortium partners you're applying for funding from. So because NFRF, there needs to be an NFRF eligible co-PI in every grant, you would have the 1.5 million over the 3 years of the project from NFRF, but then also whichever other partners you're applying from, you need to look at the funding table about what their maximum budget requests are. And then if funding is flowing to a country outside of a consortium partners, the budgeting for that would be part of whichever consortium partner budget that's going to come from. So for example, if NFRF funds are going to be used to support a partner outside of the consortium, then that would be part of your budget ask, part of that 1.5 million from NFRF.
And yes, some more. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Julia. I just had some questions. I went back up to the top, and I know, I think for the people who've joined us today, when the questions they've asked a question, we've answered. When it's at the top, they sometimes don't see it. So it was the question of what the NOIs will be used for. So the NOIs are not assessed in terms of a merit evaluation in any way, shape, or form. We use them to check the eligibility, to make sure that, there are 3 co-PIs and that at least 2 of them are eligible to receive funding from different consortium partners. So we check for an NFRF eligible one. The other consortium partner that is selected as being a potential funder, they will check the eligibility for the individual on the team that says they're eligible, as I mentioned before. That's essentially, and then we will start using the information in the NOIs to start identifying external reviewers and also the members for our multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral review panel. They are not assessed. And also, as soon as the NOI deadline passes, I believe it's a week later that the Convergence portal will open for the application stage. Go on in and start working on your application. You will not receive an email through the Convergence portal or from us to say, yes, your NOI is fine, go ahead. Essentially, if you can submit the NOI, you've met the basic criteria. We will check eligibility. And if there's an issue, for example, the example I gave before, that I think I'm eligible to apply for UKRI, and so therefore, me and my 2 colleagues, we need it, and UKRI gets back to me and says, no, actually, you're not eligible. If there's an issue like that, we will get back to you to give you time to rectify it if possible. It's finding another member, selecting a different consortium partner, whatever it might be, before the application deadline. So go ahead and start as soon as the Convergence portal opens for the application stage. If you have submitted an NOI, you absolutely have to do that. Then you'll be able to go in and start working on the application, and you should do that right away.
We are still getting a few questions regarding the NFRF eligible co-PI and whether they have to be from a Canadian institution. And yes, there is the NFRF eligible co-PI. We have a list on our website in the NFRF annex of the eligible institutions that are eligible under the 3 federal granting agencies, and they are Canadian institutions. NFRF may support those who are from international organizations or those who are not eligible under one of those, the federal granting agencies, but the co-PI who will submit the application, who is by default the NPI, must be from one of the eligible institutions with the Canadian federal granting agencies, and those are Canadian institutions.
We had a question about why CVs aren't required. Can you speak to that, Kim?
Very interesting. So the NFRF program, the New Frontiers in Research Fund, I apologize for always using the acronym. The New Frontiers in Research Fund, we don't use CVs in any of our funding opportunities. We don't have any criteria that relate to excellence of the researcher or research team, which is common, I will say, in the Canadian context. It's sort of the norm for all other funding opportunities, or most other funding opportunities. But the focus for NFRF, this program, has always been on the idea and not the people. So the people, their expertise is assessed, the expertise and experience of the research team is assessed only as part of the feasibility, in terms of, does this research team have the right mix of people with the experience and expertise required to execute this research project? But it's not an assessment of, are these the best people in the field? Because that's not necessarily how projects work. In a sense, NFRF follows the DORA principles quite well, which is the Declaration on Research Assessment, which I believe came out of San Francisco. I'm never sure of the geography of that. And so we've adopted that, in that there's no need to look at somebody's 6-year research history, or their recent, or a list of all of their publications in order to assess this. So we use a biosketch, and it's page limited because it's only about the relevant expertise and experience, and the mix of the expertise and experience on the team that is relevant to these. There may be At the NOI stage, depending on which consortium partner is selected for the funding other than NFRF, there may be a supplement required, a supplemental document, which provides a little bit more information about an individual's background or their current role, which is needed only to assess the eligibility of that person to receive funding from that consortium partner. But none of that will go to the external reviewers or the review panel. So the focus is really on the idea.
We still have a few questions about the ranking list and about how the funding will be determined. So maybe we could just, I know we've said it once, but maybe Kim, we could just go over it one more time.
Sure. So at the end of the evaluation process, the applications will be ranked based on a merit evaluation. That ranked list will then be looked at with the consortium partners. We will have a meeting together. The list will be shared with everyone. And essentially, and this is what happens in other major international initiatives as well. It's a similar model. So we start at the top and we say, okay, the consortium partners funding this top one, well, we all have money. That's great. So we go down until, you know, it might be the 25th one, maybe not, maybe it'll be the 15th, I don't know, where let's say they've requested, that application has requested funding from NFRF and from NSF. And if NSF has run out of their budget because let's say 10 of the top 15 involved NSF, I don't anticipate that will be the result. So I'm using sort of extreme examples just to illustrate the point. So if we get to number 15 and NSF has no funds left, that application is skipped. So application 15 won't be funded. Then we'll go to application 16, which maybe is asking for funding from Fiocruz, which is in Brazil, and they have funding left. So then, you know, number 16 will be funded, number 17, 18. Oh, we get to 19 and Fiocruz has run out of funding. We'll skip 19 and then go to 20. So that's generally how the process works until the funding runs out from either all partners or there are no more meritorious applications according to the evaluation process that are left to be funded.
There are a couple of questions about the full application. How long will it be? Do we have a template? The full application details are still being finalized, and when they are finalized, they will be made available in a guide on our website, similar to the NOI guide that is currently there. So we ask that you stay tuned to the website for more updates on that.
And just to explain why it's currently being finalized and it's not already up there, it is, for those of you who are familiar maybe with NFRF funding opportunities in the past, you may note that the literature is different. I would venture to say clearer. It's been quite a process to go through the literature and make sure that it is clear without relying on let's say knowledge of the Canadian research ecosystem, the paradigms that we use. So it's been quite a process to make sure that what we are putting forward is accessible to a global research community, and that the nuance is right. So every word in here has been weighed and judged by a working group representing members from all of our consortium partners. And so again, at the NOI stage, the NOI guide, and the full application stage, we are in the process now of consulting with the partners to make sure that what we are asking and the way that we will evaluate it will be understood by an international group, and also that the results of the merit evaluation will be acceptable according to the terms and conditions of each of those consortium partners and how they work under. So we are working on it. It will come shortly, but it's just that those little details that we really want to iron out to make sure that it's truly a joint initiative. It's not even though NFRF is leading the evaluation process, It really is a joint initiative, and every partner has had ample opportunity to weigh in on the language used, even the specific words and definitions and stuff. So it's coming. Not to give excuses, but I think sometimes if we provide the context, it can help a little bit, at least, swallow the frustration by it, I guess. Yeah. There was a question here. It was interesting, and I just want to explain our limitation about it. So there was a question about could we publish, sort of the names and titles for the notices of intent for the NOIs. Unfortunately, we can't. And it's because of provisions under the Privacy Act in Canada. So we can only publish that information in terms of the tri-agencies and NFRF and our program terms and conditions. We can only publish information if there's funding attached to it and somebody was able to get funding. Otherwise, it's considered private information. So we can't actually share that. If there was a university, or an organization willing to set up, a website that people could opt into and provide that information to, that would be fine, but we can't do it ourselves, and we can't be involved in it. So it's a limitation because of the laws that we operate under, not because we are refusing to be collaborative. We just can't in that instance.
Maybe just two more things we could touch on, a little bit about vulnerability in the global north versus in consortium partner countries versus elsewhere, and whether there's any priority or anything given to one over the other in the call. And then also a little bit about the mitigation versus adaptation aspect of the call.
Okay, in terms of, so let me start with vulnerable groups. There is no limitation in terms of their geographic location. I will say that the working group, the consortium partners working group, we discussed this quite a bit to see if we wanted to identify, regional areas or countries or anything, and the sense was no, because there are vulnerable groups according to our definition of vulnerable, or the call's definition of vulnerable groups that are anywhere. So it really is up to the applicants to justify is not the right word, but to provide the rationale of how the group that they are working with and to solve a problem is a vulnerable group. So there's no prioritization that will happen. The ranked list won't have a list of, the geographic area where the vulnerable group is. It's just, does it meet all the requirements? How was it assessed overall by through the evaluation process? So no, if they're vulnerable, regardless of where they are, they can be considered. Emma, what was the second question you asked? I'm sorry.
We've just had a couple of questions about mitigation versus adaptation.
So there's no priority in terms of whether an application proposes to, a mitigation strategy or an adaptation strategy. There isn't a preference for one or the other, and projects aren't expected to do both either. So it's adaptation or mitigation. Some of them, I suppose it's possible that a project could propose both. I have no idea what can be out there. And one of the reasons you'll notice that the call was not designed very specifically, address this, do this, make sure you include these people, or these groups of people in either in terms of region or profession or sector. And part of the reason is in designing this, the consortium partners, what we wanted to do was explain what we wanted at the end, and then allow researchers, to have parameters that were quite wide, and that allows a lot of flexibility. As a former president once said, president of an agency once said, you know, if you create boxes, then you box people in. And we are sure that there are ideas out there that will completely surprise us in terms of what's being proposed and the potential in them. So that's why it's not prescriptive in terms of the projects that we want to see specifically. So that's why there are 8 representative key risk areas. You have to address 2, but we're not going to tell you which 2, and we're not going to tell you how they need to be addressed. And there really is a lot of flexibility in that. And I would say the same for adaptation and mitigation. It doesn't have to be both. There's no preference or prioritization of one versus the other. The sky's the limit, but the sky is also not, you know, required. So it's about designing a project that meets the overall intentions of the call. There's a question there about so it says regarding the until the funding runs out strategy. And I will read the question because some people might not have seen it. It says, let's say I apply with a UKRI partner, should we consider how much we ask? Like if they ask the full £500,000, could it impact our ranking if NFRF wants to fit as many UKRI partners as possible? Example, we might rank higher if we applied for £200,000. The ranking will not be influenced by the amount requested. The ranking will be the ranking based on the evaluation, the merit evaluation of the application. So we won't, the consortium partners won't, the members won't inflate the ranking, let's say, or boost up ones that request less funding in order to fund more projects. It really will be about the project that's being proposed. Budget will be considered in the evaluation, and if you look at the evaluation matrices, it's mentioned there, but it's in terms of you know, value for money is one of the considerations in feasibility. So, you know, but and all that to say, ask for the amount that's required, that is feasible, in order to achieve the project or achieve the project goals, execute the project and achieve the goals. You know, I don't know any researchers who are used to working with the Cadillac model though, so I think most researchers are, you know, I'll just say don't inflate the budget, but ask for the required amount. The amount that you request is not going to factor into the ranked list. That being said, if number 14 on the list, and I'm making these numbers up, number 14 requests, you know, £500,000 from UKRI, and number 15 requests 200,000, and they don't have enough for the 500,000, but they do for the 200. That might impact something, but it would only be if they were, you know, the two in line with each other, or you know, the sort of similar in ranking and just one above or below the other. But it's not going to, we're not going to artificially put the ones or interfere in any way so that all of the ones with UKRI that ask for less than 500 are prioritized over the ones that asked for 500,000 pounds, for example. So there's a question again about the max budget. So the maximum budget depends on which consortium partners are involved. So if it's a project,
Oh, sorry, Kim, your sound has...
I know it does. Sorry. If it's a project that involves, well, NFRF, for example, and UKRI, then the maximum would be £1.5 million over 3 years plus £500,000 over 3 years. If it is between, I'm just looking for the table again. You know, if it's between Canada and you know, another person on the team is eligible to apply to DFG from Germany, well, it's at £1.5 million from NFRF is the maximum that can be asked. Germany doesn't, DFG doesn't have a limit, so could it be more than the equivalent of the £500,000 that you could receive up to from UKRI? Yes, it could be more than that. And the reason for that, let me explain that. The reason for that is each of these funding agencies, each of our consortium partners has a different funding model. So those, for example, in Canada, we don't have a salary component for the researchers, for the academic researchers, because that's not the Canadian context. In the United States, for example, in NSF, they do, and I believe UKRI is similar to this, not 100% sure for UKRI, but they do the full cost of the indirect costs. So the full costing, and so I think NSF, I've heard, and I don't have the details, but just for example, I think up to 50% or 57% or something of the grant can be used for indirect costs of research. We don't have that in the Canadian context. So that's the reason that each organization has different limits. It's also the reason why it's, as Julia mentioned early in the presentation, that you have to look at the annex to see what's eligible for them. Now, if I understand the Canadian context more, just because where I am. So if I were to work with, let's say, Julia, and Julia is from Germany, so she's going to apply to DFG. I mean, Julia would know the rules for DFG. Presumably, she would be familiar with that. And so she would look at the annex stuff as well to make sure, but she would have a better idea of not just what she could or should ask for, but what, what the appropriate or required costs are to support such a project in that context. So I wouldn't have that as the Canadian part, or the participant in Canada who's going to apply to NFRF, but I would know what I could apply to NFRF for example. So it really is about co-development with your co-PIs, also with those from vulnerable communities or vulnerable groups. But nobody's going to have the full picture of what funding. I would doubt one single individual on the team would have, the understanding for the full picture of the funding model. So it's about working with partners to do that.
We've had a couple questions about whether NFRF is the only partner that allows for funds to go outside of the consortia. I believe that UKRI does as well, but what I would suggest is either looking in the annex for that partner or in the consortium partners table. There's an email contact for each consortia partner. And so if you can't find that information and you would like to know because you're going to be applying for funding from that partner, you could always reach out and ask. But as far as I'm aware, only NFRF and UKRI allow for that.
There's a couple questions, if there are a couple of people that are wondering if there are any excluded countries.
Hold on just one second, Julie. Just in case other people don't see this, and I'm just noticing it now, one of the attendees has indicated that DFG, so the German Research Foundation, that they can also support, whoops, it just flipped away on me, co-PIs in the Global South. So I'll just share that with everybody because I just saw it pop up there. Thank you for providing that information. Sorry, Julia, back to you.
No, I was just saying that there are some that are wondering if there are any excluded countries, and I was wondering if you could speak to that.
No, there are no excluded countries. We don't operate that way. I will say that we will be implementing, but I don't think it's for this call. In the Canadian research context, they're starting to look at research security, but that doesn't look at the country of somebody's involvement. It looks at, an individual and the risk that the information could be used for example, for military capacity. So I don't see that happening here. And I don't think that will even apply to this call. So no geographic exclusions, no excluded countries.
Thank you.
So there's a comment there. Somebody from the Canadian context says Canada has a pause or an embargo on research agreements with entities in China under research security concerns. Again, that depends on the individual and the institution that they are working for. So we don't have, because it's only select institutions in China that there was an article yesterday in the newspaper about it. So and again, it's about research security from more from a military security perspective, and perhaps I'm not thinking creatively enough, but I'm having difficulty imagining how an adaptation or mitigation strategy might be used militarily. So I don't see that as being an issue. But officially, and I can say that with all certainty, there are no restricted countries. So there's nothing restricted on a sort of as a country as a whole. There's a good question there. That's a good question. So it said if one co-PI is US based and there is an outside partner to funds in the US, hold on. Can the Canadian based co-PI distribute funds to the US partners outside of the co-PI? Okay, I think I understand the question and I'll say it a different way. So for example, in the UKRI, and I may have the details wrong, but this was an example that was given during one of our working group meetings. So I'll use this as an example. So UKRI, for example, they can support academic researchers, but if one of the members of the team is at an NGO, for example, in the UK, the UKRI funds cannot be used to support that individual. I believe I have that right, but let's assume that's right anyway, just for the example. So NFRFI funds could be used to support the research activities of the person, even if they're based in the UK, if they can't be supported by UKRI funds. Yeah. So yes, the answer is yes, they can. The only limitation, and this is important for NFRFI funding, I believe it's the same for all the consortium partners as well, or the vast majority of them, funds cannot flow or be used to support the activities of somebody from private sector. And in the case of NFRFI, cannot be used to support the activities of somebody affiliated with the government. So there's an odd question. I'll read it. I'll answer it, but I will also say that, for specific cases, please do send us an email that says, what if you have dual positions at separate institutions and could be eligible as both an NFRFI and a UKRI applicant? Could you theoretically be one of your own co-PIs or at least administering funds on both sides? So say managing research associates. You could not count as two of the three co-PIs that are required because we really want to have representation from multiple countries within the project team. This really it's an international call. We expect the projects to be international as well. However, could you be the one that's actually managing the funds from UKRI and NFRFI separately through your different institutions? I don't see a reason why that would be restricted unless there's something built into, I don't know, how you're affiliated with both. I don't see a problem with that, but you couldn't count as two of the three. You could actually manage the funds, but you'd still need to be three. You'd still need to have two other people within your group of three PIs, co-PIs. Oh, clarification. So the question is, if we want to work with local governments and cities, these cannot receive funding from NFRF. Again, please reach out with specific questions because it depends. If you're talking about local governments in Canada, let's say, generally not. If it's from, local government in another country, it depends on the situation, I would say, and we just have to look at it a little bit more closely. Generally speaking, Canadian federal funding can't be used to support the activities that another government should be doing. So, because that doesn't make sense. But anyway, send us an email if for a specific question like that. Question was, so if there's one Swiss partner, one from Canada and one from the Philippines, and the partner from the Philippines I think this is what it means, requires $200,000 to support their research activities over the 3 years, that funding can, assuming it meets our requirements, the $200,000 can be taken from the NFRF, or they can be supported by the NFRF grant, but the NFRF grant doesn't, the maximum is still the same, whether or not we're supporting people in another country or not.
We're getting a few questions, Kim, regarding whether or not attendees can enter their email addresses or contact information in the chat so other interested attendees could connect.
But if somebody would like to, please feel free to put your contact information in the chat if you'd like. We are not requesting it from our end, sort of thing. It's not a requirement at all. If you're interested in it, please do. If you want to put some contact information, your name, institution, the area that you work in, or what kind of project you're interested in, please go ahead. But it is voluntary as long as
I think many of the remaining questions were touched on, at least in part, but I'll go through and see if there's any others that we can address specifically. And again, if we didn't answer your question fully, or if you have additional points you'd like to clarify, please do send us an email and we will get back to you with more information. There's one here saying regarding the rating process or the evaluation process. Does an overall rating of fail mean an application could have pass for fit, pass for EDI, but fail for interdisciplinarity and still move forward? Or if the team fails at least one of the categories, the application is considered unfundable and does not move forward. So an application with an overall rating of fail for any of those 3 categories. So if it fails for fit to program, but still passes for EDI and interdisciplinarity, it would not be considered fundable. An application with an overall rating of fail for any one of those 3 would not be considered overall fundable.
There's a question about vulnerable groups. It says, can you clarify whether this call expects to work with vulnerable groups or for them? It is expected to be a co-development and co-leadership. Now, that being said, there may be groups that work with the vulnerable groups that maybe an NGO that may be better placed. But again, it is about co-leadership and co-design, co-development. Says if an application has ineligible funds for a consortium partner with a Canadian-based RGO be responsible for catching this? No. No, the budget will be reviewed, or the budget ask will be reviewed according to each consortium partner's normal processes, and however they assess that. For NFRF funds, generally, you know, the budget is looked at as it's not a budget that is set in stone. And regardless of, you know, what is proposed in the budget, everything has to, once a grant is awarded, everything still has to, all expenses would still have to meet the requirements of the tri-agency grant. No, but financial administration. The guide, the tri-agency guide for financial administration. So yes.
It's a good question there about the structure, organization, and
Yeah.
whether, yeah.
So it says that, you know, does it mean the Canadian institution will lead and an applicant from, let's say, the UK will be co-investigators? So the NFRF eligible researcher and the other co-PIs, they are all co-leaders. The only way that the NFRF eligible researcher has a slightly different role is in logging into the Convergence portal and creating the application file. Once it's created and the NFRF eligible co-PI invites the other co-PIs, all those co-PIs will have full access to the application. In addition, the NFRF eligible co-PI will be the one at the end when they're all ready to do it, will click submit and it gets submitted through their institution. That is a technical limitation of the system in terms of opening it up and opening it up to applicants from over the world. So the way we've addressed that is, you know, the NFRF eligible co-PI is the one that sort of opens the process and closes it, but they aren't the only one to write the application. All of the co-PIs do. The co-PIs, it is a co-led project. The expectation is it's co-led project through the life of the project, and even more so. So, for example, in this example, it says, you know, your co-PI from the UK. Well, the co-PI from the UK will actually be managing the grants from the grant funds from UKRI. They will have to sign an agreement or whatever process they go through with UKRI to have those funds and to make use of those funds and report on the use of those funds. The NFRF eligible co-PI will be reporting on the use of the NFRF funds, and, you know, we'll have that agreement. They'll be bound by the terms and conditions of the NFRF grant, but it is a co-led project. So the management of the funds is distributed for logistical reasons as much as any. I mean, each of the consortium partners has limitations and requirements in terms of you know, the administration and follow up on the use of funds. And so that's the way that we're approaching it, but it is expected that the project is a co-led project.
There's some questions on eligibility of salaries and specific costs related to specific projects. I would encourage those folks to perhaps send us an email. We can direct you to, at the moment, we can direct all of you to the NFRF Annex, which includes information about our funding model and what is eligible under the NFRF call. But if you have specific questions regarding a project, we might be able to answer them more effectively in an email once we have a little bit more time to do some digging for you.
So we have about 5 minutes left. If you asked a question a long time ago and it hasn't been answered, please feel free to write it again because we may have missed it. Also, I just want to say, personally, I find it really exciting, these little blurbs, I think that diminishes them a little bit, but these little descriptions and that the attendees are adding about the types of research they're working on and who they're, that they're looking for. I just find that really exciting. So thank you for making my day and doing that. I know that, it was a bit of a process to get to this international call, but we're really excited to see what might come out of it. And we're happy to, we're happy to see the interest in the call, and we're excited to see what comes of it. So please do feel free to send us an email through the NFRF inbox. If your screen looks like anything like mine, then you can actually see it on the screen. It's one of the gray boxes actually has, or at least the first part of our email address there. And I know it is on the slides. We will be sharing the slides. So for the Canadian researchers, please ask your research administrators or your research grants office probably next week for the slides. We'll be sending them the emails. If you're not in the Canadian context, thank you very much for joining us, because I'm guessing for you it's probably not the morning. It may be the evening or wherever you are. So thank you for joining us. Feel free to email us probably next week. It just takes a day to process and get the slides up and the recording up, but please do feel free to email us and we'll share it with you. We will also be sharing it with each of the consortium partners, so they may distribute it as well. I'm not sure what approach they'll take, but don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to support you in answering your questions or providing any insight to help you as you develop a project for this.
And Kim, maybe we just had one question that I think worth noting as well. There will be a second webinar for the full application stage. So we will be holding another set of webinars in May. So stay tuned to the website for the links for those.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, yes. And yes, I will second what Kim said. It's very exciting to hear all of your questions and to see the interest in this program. Yeah, we look forward to being in contact with you more throughout the process. Please do send us questions via email if they didn't get answered, or if you have additional things you'd like us to clarify. We're always here to help out in that way. For the Q&A, I believe some folks were able to access it through the menu bar and going to the file and save. This may not be the case for everyone. I know there was some trouble with it, but hopefully, and the question and answers that we have addressed verbally will be also available in the recording. But yes, with that, I think we can stop the recording, Adilium.